Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Recovery Cafe. I hope that you will enjoy being here on Recovery Cafe and that we'll have fun together here. Let's see. Not sure if this is coming across live. I think we are live. Yeah. Okay. Um, you can type in comments. I'll be able to see your comments when you type them in. That's how we'll communicate. So, um, hoping to see you. The first three people that come on live, I have a special gift for you. So, I'll be waiting to see who comes on and hear your comments so that I know that you are here. So, the purpose of coming on tonight is to talk about the Real Deep Recovery movement and to talk a little bit about emotional and spiritual recovery. We've created this movement. We've got 117 members, and what's it about? I know what I think it's about, but I'd like to hear what you guys think it's about. So, um, that's the point of having the Recovery Cafe. The other thing is we can talk about anything that you'd like to talk about in recovery. We can run it like a meeting format, but we can also run it a little more loosely and just talk about things in general in recovery. So that's entirely up to you and what you think might be a good topic. That it's really fun that we've managed to bring together as many people as we have, and we have 117 members now, and so it would be fun to hear what you think about that. Actually, it says we have 118 members, so we've actually picked somebody new up just tonight. So let's see what we've got here so far. You could send a heart or a like if you're on. Hey, Sheila, I see that you're here. Looks like Phil, Sheila, and three others are here. Sheila, you've just won yourself a $10 Starbucks card for being the first person to comment. I'll wait to see who else comments. So, congratulations. I'm glad I found out we were neighbors. And as I was starting to see. Oh, looks like Brian is here. Hi, Brian. Drop a comment to just let me know you're here. And I was starting out to say that the purpose of having Recovery Cafe is to talk a little bit about what it means to have a real deep recovery movement. We have 118 members, and I'm grateful that everybody has signed on and joined this movement. And I'd like to hear a little bit from you about what you might think it means to have a real deep recovery movement. If you look at the top bar, when I started this, I thought, let's talk about what it means to be in total recovery, abstinent from all mood altering substances. To me, that means a lot because I'm in 44 years of recovery. And when I got sober, you didn't even hardly take an an aspirin, much less anything else. So far I have three people: Brian, Sheila. I think Phil is on here. You've all won a $10 Starbucks card. So thanks for joining on. And if you'll direct message me your email, I'll send you those cards. So, as I was saying, when we first started, you didn't hardly take an aspirin or they'd consider that you weren't sober. That's changed a little bit over the years, and that's probably with good reason because sometimes we need helpful medications. But, sometimes things get floated way over to the other side of the spectrum too. So, when real deep recovery to me doesn't just mean not drinking, it means also working the steps, working programs in whatever various programs you're in, and looking at getting emotional and spiritual recovery too. So I'm wondering, for those of you in the audience, what you think of as emotional or spiritual recovery. I'm not going to do all the talking here tonight. I'd like to hear from you guys. Hey, Shireen, good to see you. Wendy, hi. So, what do you think of as emotional recovery in your program? Hi, John. I know it's hard to type answers in. Maybe you can use your talk to type button to make comments. What do you think of as emotional recovery? I have a few notes, but I'd rather hear from you. Is the idea of that you can't see each other? That's a little bit difficult on these things. We can always do this on Zoom where we can see each other. But for tonight, I just put it on live Facebook, live chat. You can type or speak your comments to chat. So, sometimes being emotionally sober just means that you're comfortable being present with all your feelings, without any of them defining or controlling you. Sometimes it takes a while, there was this guy, Ernie Larson, who was writing about 15 years ago, and he used to say that stage one recovery was the first year or two, and that was just getting sober, you know? And that meant just stopping drinking and drugs and substances, and that it took a year or two just to get everything out of your system. And we didn't even worry about emotional recovery or spiritual recovery. We just worried about getting stopped. After that, he defined things as stage two recovery. And stage two recovery was where you started to deal with your emotions and relating to other people. And that's when he would call it emotional sobriety. And that would involve, learning to get some skills like you thawed out from all the getting sober stuff. And then it was time to start relating. And that's where that whole thing of no emotional involvements for the first year came from. It was kind of thought of that you couldn't handle much besides not drinking, not drugging, and getting to meetings and learning how to work the steps. And that after that, then maybe once you thought out some, then you might be able to handle more emotional stuff and move forward from there. And the term emotional sobriety was actually coined by Bill W. And in the big book, it's not talked about so much more in detail, but in the grapevine, Bill writes about it as achieving real maturity and balance by managing your emotions in healthy ways. And there were some articles written about emotional sobriety means going beyond abstinence. So I don't know, like what do you guys think? I think you're you must have some opinions. I know it's hard to get used to these kind of things, but drop a comment. Tell me what you're thinking about. Maybe first start by dropping your recovery date and where you think you are in Do you think you have emotional recovery, emotional sobriety, spiritual sobriety? Oh, there we go. Sorry, my comments weren't loading. Sheila is here. John is here. John says, I was in the hospital after major surgery and a guy was in recovery. He went through hell and back and he would not take aspirin. Some people are like that. They're pretty strict. Sheila, you never heard this term. Yeah. Hey, T. Good to see you. Welcome, welcome. Welcome to everybody. Yeah, it depends, I think, a lot about when you came into recovery, how strictly you think about the idea of other medications. Like I said, when I came in early on, the people were discouraged. And I remember I said to somebody that a doctor had told me that I might need antidepressants, and a guy in the room piped up and said, "You won't be sober if you take that stuff." That's certainly not the way we look at things nowadays, but 40 years ago, that is how it was looked at. So things have changed a lot. Um, I'm looking, Sheila, to tell you, I looked up a few things ahead of time and looking for a definition of emotional sobriety. It goes beyond simply not drinking alcohol to developing emotional and spiritual maturity, about cultivating a balanced and mature approach to oneself, others, and to a higher power. It's about managing emotions, involves learning to experience, confront, and accept all emotions without letting them control you or lead to relapse. And I think I was around maybe 10 or 15 years in recovery, so like 30 years ago, when they started talking about relapse prevention. And that's when the words emotional sobriety and spiritual recovery started to come into play a lot. So, so it's the idea of just not drinking or drugging, but learning how to manage and cope and develop tools to cope with your emotions. Anybody else have thoughts about that? I know there's folks on who have been sober a while. So, and the idea of spiritual, key aspects of spiritual sobriety beyond physical abstinence involves a recognition that true sobriety is more than just abstaining from drugs and alcohol and encompasses physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of self. And that spirituality, we're not just talking about religion, we're talking about a deep connection to something greater than yourself. And it could be a religious faith, but it could also be just a connection to a sense of, the universe or nature or anything that has deeper meaning to you and helps you to connect to a sense of yourself that's greater than just I, me, my. Spiritual sobriety is often guided by principles like acceptance, humility, recognizing your own limitations and a need for guidance, service, focusing on the needs of others, and hope and faith, believing in a positive future, and the support of a higher power or higher self. So, what do you think? John says, I couldn't manage emotions until I took Dr. prescribe the meds. And that's often true if we feel so overwhelmed that it's difficult to manage without getting the depth of the emotions under control first, and then moving on to learn some other tools for managing. Absolutely. Other thoughts? Well, not everyone goes to meetings, but certainly a lot of us who do know that part of the program, the first part of the program is realizing that we are powerless and our lives are unmanageable. But the other parts of the program involve learning tools that do help us to cope and develop a different mindset that helps us to manage those feelings and emotions and to weather. I was talking on a meeting today about, life kind of goes like waves, and we learn how to manage life and stand like connect with other people to help us manage, but also learn tools to manage our feelings in the midst of life going up and down so that we can weather those storms. And one woman was talking about having a loss that was in a group that she belonged to, not an AA group, but a social group, and that a lot of the people didn't have a program, and the fact that she did and had some long term recovery allowed her to support the other people who were going through the loss who didn't have the same tools that she had. I found that pretty striking. So, the spiritual part of the program, why it matters, right? One part is the emotional and spiritual healing that we address the underlying emotional and spiritual wounds, some of which we carry in here with us because we've been using drugs and drinking and just masking or burying some of those wounds, and now we can address those underlying issues. We reduce our relapse rates when we have some kind of spiritual foundation or principles that kind of help to hold us up. And as we develop prayer, meditation, mindfulness, different kinds of coping skills, we offer a way to find meaning, peace, connection to our life, and we replace the void that's left in our lives that we were filling with addiction, right? So we begin to develop other ways and skills to cope. That famous line, we have only to pick up this kit of spiritual tools that's laid at our feet. A lot of us have stories of things that we've been through that you know we might not have coped with before, but we learn to cope with as we go through. I know that I got sober only a short time before my father became ill with cancer and died. And it was only about 3 years later that my mother also died. And I would have never, ever imagined that I would have coped with those things without drinking or drugging. And they were hard, but I slowly walked through them. I know that I went to a lot more meetings. My first sponsor kind of trained me up that whenever you go through something difficult, you go to 90 meetings in 90 days. I thought that was crazy at first, but in fact, that's exactly what I did. And I had no great love for my dad at that point. I've since gentled up about that, but I because I had no great love for him and I hadn't made peace, it made it really difficult to cope with his illness and loss. And I went to meetings and shared about it, shared my bitterness, my anger, my frustration, my lack of peace. And so many people in different meetings would come up to me and talk to me afterwards and share either ways they had coped or share the things that they had gone through, the difficult things that they had gone through. And it helped so much not to be alone with those feelings. It didn't make it necessarily easier. It certainly didn't make it easier. Sometimes it made it harder to hear those stories. I cried a lot. I screamed a lot. Um, I walked out of meetings sometimes. But the thing is that little by little, from hearing people's stories, I learned skills that I didn't have. I learned to journal. I learned to pray. I learned to scream in my car when I was driving. I learned to use music. I learned all kinds of coping mechanisms. I actually learned to talk to a priest. I wasn't even religious. But I learned that there were people who had talents and skills and tools that I didn't have, and that by going to some of these people, I could learn other things. I even learned some legal tools and tricks about, what you do when people die from people who've been through it before. So practical things as well as emotional things. And, so the first time through with my dad was really, really hard. The next time through, I had to learn to cope with a long, long illness with my mother and caring for her. And then I learned different tools through that. So, I didn't realize at the time that I was learning to manage my emotions. I thought I was hanging on by a thread. But as each thing happened, I learned to cope with those things gradually and slowly. And I also learned that I could trust people. I had absolutely zero trust of anybody when I came in this program. And little by little, as people helped me, I found out, oh, sometimes you can trust people in the program. And as I learned to do that, then I realized, wow, you can do things with other people. I also learned that you don't trust everybody for everything all at once, and that was like a sort of miraculous thing to learn. I learned that, at first I would just kind of vomit my whole story onto people. And sometimes people would run the other way, and I'd be like, see, you can't trust anybody. But I learned gradually that I could share little things with people, a little bit at a time. And that um, as I shared, no, oh, thanks, John, I got that question. As I shared little things, I built trust, and then I shared a little more, built a little more trust, shared a little more. John asked, this may be off point, but where does actual brain chemistry fit into recovery? And that is actually a really good question. When they wrote the big book, they were guessing, they had a theory that alcoholism was an allergy and that once we picked up a drink, we could not stop, and that was an allergy to alcohol. We may not exactly call it an allergy today, but we actually know that there is a science behind that when we ingest alcohol and drugs, what it does is it overproduces so much dopamine. It forces the body to overproduce so much dopamine in the brain that and serotonin that our body actually stops producing its own dopamine and serotonin. And therefore, the craving is produced by the fact that then when you stop, like within that 2 or 3 days, your body's not producing its own dopamine and serotonin, and that's what produces the cravings. And there is a difference in our chemistry if we're addicts or alcoholics in the way the brain stops producing things like that. And so the craving comes because then your serotonin and dopamine levels drop so suddenly that you feel like you're going to die. And it causes all kinds of physiological reactions in the body. I'm giving like a super simplified version of this. There's a wonderful, wonderful series of tapes that you can watch on YouTube called Pleasure Unwoven. They're by a man who is a addictionologist, and it shows you, in very simplified terms, but shows the science of how this works and why we crave and why it sets up that cycle of craving in the brain. It can take a year up to 2 years for your body, once you stop, especially opiates or alcohol, for your body to begin to produce serotonin and dopamine on its own, and catecholamines, which is I can't think of the other word for that. So anyway, because of that, that's one of the reasons that that we use replacement substances to help to keep you from having those crazy cravings, like Suboxone, naltrexone, and so we didn't know this when we only understood this as a theory like 80 years ago, but that theory has actually been proven to be a science now. And so we know now that our brain takes a long, long time, up to 2 years, to repair itself, and that is also the reason for so many relapses. It's why sometimes people are right in the middle of rehab. I've worked in rehab, so I know this to be true. You could be right in the middle of rehab and think like, "Oh, I'm doing fine," and there's something called post-acute withdrawal syndrome, and you wake up like 15 to 30 days into treatment, and all of a sudden you're just dead craving, and you are going to get out of that rehab no matter what, because all of a sudden you think you're fine one day, and then the next day you're like, nope, nope, I got to get out of here. And it's that cycle of craving being activated, and it happens at 15, 30, 45, 60, 90, and so on. It's like a cycle, and it's actually post-acute withdrawal. And it is a really hard thing to say no to. And I have never seen any counselor or anybody be able to talk somebody out of it when they're in that cycle. It takes a lot of understanding, brain understanding on one level, but it also takes I worked in a rehab where they actually use substitute amino acids to help people to deter those cravings. And that's the only way I've seen somebody resist that cycle of craving, when it sets up certain foods, eating proteins, not sugar, certain healthy diet will help with that as well. So I hope that answers your question, John. Any other questions regarding that? And regarding anything to do with post-acute withdrawal or with early recovery? I mean, one of the reasons that the relapse rate is so high has a lot to do with that post-acute withdrawal, and it helps if you read about it and understand it yourself and stick close to meetings. A connection with humans, other humans that are in recovery, is probably the best defense we have against relapse, truly. Just being with other people that have been through it and can support us. Thoughts, ideas, questions? You're welcome, Sheila. You know, we can never underestimate the power of our disease. Sometimes I think, we've gotten way too up in our heads. And like they used to say when I came in, your disease wants you dead, you know? And I still adhere to that. I really believe that. I think that we have to really treat our disease almost like a second entity that lives inside of us and tries to pull us off track. And my first sponsor would, I'd say like, oh, I have this voice inside of me. I could be sitting in a meeting, and I'd be like listening to all this good stuff and thinking this good stuff, and in my head I'd be hearing this little voice would be saying, well, you're going to drink right after, you'll go get a drug. And my sponsor would say, just say thank you for sharing and move on, go to another meeting, read the big book, do something to put something positive in there. Nowadays, we call that mindset. We say like we have a negative mindset that's always talking to us, just chattering in our ear, negative, and we're more used to that. That's what's been in our head for a long time. And we have to completely change that mindset and fill our head with positive stuff. And the positive stuff does not come naturally. So we have to put in about 5 times more positive than we put in negative, because the negative stuff has been programmed in there since we began our addiction. And it isn't just addicts that have it. It is kind of more naturally a negative mindset thing that our brains do. So we have to, that's why gratitude lists work so well. That if we get up in the morning and we set ourselves with like a positive reading, a quiet time to kind of consider that, and we write gratitudes and we do positive things to kind of program our brain from the time we wake up in the morning, it tends to set us on a positive track, which works pretty well for ourselves. So what else? What other thoughts? Anything? So what do you get about this idea of a real deep recovery movement? I'll tell you a little bit. My thought was that I get a little tired of the idea that it's okay to smoke a little pot. It's okay to do a little this or that over here. I'm like an old-fashioned recovery person, so the idea of a real deep recovery movement for me was the idea of really supporting people who are doing, what's not the natural thing these days, which is to stay off all drugs and all alcohol. I have a couple kids that they don't drink or drug. They never did. They grew up. There's kind of a little bit of a movement of some kids who just don't like to drink or drug. What an amazing thing! But they're nerds compared to a lot of other people, and it's not a natural thing. And so I want to support them. So other than working the steps, what else do you recommend? Well, that's a good question too. So I guess I'll start by asking you, Sheila, do you work a program? Do you have a sponsor and work the steps? Because that takes a lot of time and energy to begin with, so I start everybody there. I think that one of the things that I noticed was that it was sort of falling out of vogue to do that. It takes a lot of time and energy, and people are really, really busy. So I do first start people right there, because once you put yourself into that, you find out that there's a huge amount of tools. But the other thing that I think has fallen out of favor is doing other social things related to the program. When I first moved here, we were just talking about this tonight. When I first moved here, there was a Valentine's Day dance. There was a Thanksgiving dinner. There is still a Christmas party in Charlestown. Like it's wonderful social events. Got a crazy Chinese auction, and it's a social thing where you get to know. I just bought tickets to the gratitude breakfast, November 15th. A lot of social stuff. We used to, when my husband and I were young, when we were just getting to know each other, we used to go on rafting trips and retreats and fishing trips and all this crazy stuff. And it was also disco time. We went disco dancing as a group of people, and it was goofy. I didn't even like disco. But it was the idea that we were learning this. This goes to the issue of emotional sobriety. We were learning how to go out as a group of people together and socialize without drugs or alcohol. Now, I know that some of this has changed because people do screens now. I'm on screens. But there is something to be said for going out into the world together and learning, to get along, doing goofy stuff together. You know, even when I first moved here to the area, there used to be after the Saturday night meeting, a bunch of people that went down by the Shenandoah River and went fishing and grilled hot dogs. I don't know if that still happens, but you know, it was not a group of people that would normally socialize together. And but the idea that we did made it kind of fun and different. And there is something to be said about that for it, you know, on the surface level, it's social, okay, fun, it's goofy, you know. My husband and I used to call it cornball therapy, you know, because you go out and you do stuff with people you wouldn't normally do stuff with, and it's awkward. But the more you do it, the more comfortable you get in your sober skin, in your clean and sober skin. But on another level, it was learning skills. Now, I don't know about you, but I was 10 when I started drinking and drugging. There's a lot of stuff you learn when you're a teenager that I never learned because I was high. So when I started going out and doing this stuff, going to discos with a group of 10 or 15 people, going on these crazy rafting trips, going on retreats, doing all this different stuff, what I was learning to do was grow up from the stuff that I never learned when I was a teenager. And I needed to learn how to do that stuff, you know? So when I made myself do, and my sponsor had to tell me this did not come naturally to me. When I made myself go and do uncomfortable stuff, whether it was service in the program, working the steps, or going out to a disco, you know, what I was learning to do was grow up through my adolescence. And thank God it doesn't take all the years it would have taken when we were teenagers. So does that make sense? Any other questions? Thoughts? That's a good question, Sheila. It really is. And I think that, you know, I wish that some people would step up. I'm getting a little old. I used to organize retreats and dances and things like that, but I wish that some people would step up and organize some of those things for folks that are younger because we need them. You know, we had a bowling night, and I know not everybody lives in the same area, but we had a bowling night, couple of them this year, and they were the best attended 12-step things that we've had. So, you know, and bowling is not necessarily the most popular sport in the world, but it was a fun thing to get people out doing social stuff together, you know. So, you know, the picnics, things like that, doing things that take you outside of your comfort zone, just strictly for the idea of getting you outside of your comfort zone, because that's how we learn when we're willing to kind of confront ourselves a little bit. Any other thoughts? I appreciate you guys coming on. I'm going to try to kind of um, do this on a regular basis, maybe do one during the day on the weekend and one in the evening for people that have different schedules, and encourage talk it up with your friends so that we can talk about things that you know you normally wouldn't bring up during a meeting. And also I really am trying to build a little bit of a movement around total abstinent recovery. And so, if that's something that interests you or interests your friends, I'd like to create a place where we can talk about that. So, what about topics for the future? Any ideas for me that you can suggest? Things that I could maybe do a little research on or present for you. Have I answered your questions? Oh, that's awesome, Sheila. Sponsor and sponsees. That's the way to do it. One of the things I see is that people don't always do that. They're a little bit afraid of working the steps themselves. And I think that you really learn the program. It's one thing to go through the steps with your sponsor, but when you actually start sponsoring other people, that's when you really learn the program. I love that. I'm so happy to hear you say that you're active yourself that way. That's so cool. And of course, the next step, doing service and going, like traveling to go to other activities in service where you meet people outside of the area. That's pretty cool too. I've made a lot of friends across the state. Like I'm doing a day of service. It's called Day of Sharing. It's up in oh boy, I can't think of the name. Berwyn, I think, Pennsylvania, and there's people coming from like 5 states. And I love things like that because when you begin to hear people sharing from other states, you hear like different ways people do things and you make friends from different states. That's kind of a cool thing within the program too. All right. Last last thoughts or questions? I think we'll end a little bit early unless people have other stuff to talk about. I appreciate, John. I thank you for bringing the stuff up about brain chemistry and people in the hospital. You live in Berwyn? Oh my gosh, John, I might have to stop in and see you. That's great. That's awesome. I like the concept for this day of sharing. They did unity service and recovery. So they're going to talk about the home group. They're going to talk about service in other areas besides meetings. And they're going to talk about the unity, like doing things outside of just meetings and service. So it's a pretty cool day. And the guy chose people 1 to 5 years in recovery, 5 to 15 years, and over 15 years for each area for sharing. So that a lot of thought went into, and then from Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia, and DC. So and there, oh, and maybe New Jersey. So it's going to be like this huge area of that's covered in terms of people coming to share at this thing. So I'm really excited about it. So, so, all right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. And I'm going to try to do one either Saturday or Sunday during the day. You'll see it posted. So please talk it up to people, let people know. I'll put the post up and then you could share it with other people. Any last comments or thoughts? I just realized I have to keep refreshing this to get everybody's comments to come up. I'm learning too. Yes, I will definitely send you the link, Sheila. Thank you so much. All right. And I'll send you your Starbucks card, Sheila. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being on. And I'm grateful that you helped me get this started, and hopefully, we'll build in numbers as we go. Take care and blessings to you all. I'll see you hopefully on the weekend. I'll say good night for now. Bye bye.